The phone call came just after sunrise, while the rain still clung to the cracked windows of the tiny garage at the edge of Maple Hollow Road. The old fluorescent light overhead buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive, and grease-stained tools hung silently against the wall as if they had given up on being useful years ago. Nolan Pierce stood frozen beside a rusted pickup truck when he heard the trembling voice on the other end of the line say the words that would change everything. 5 dealerships had already declared the transmission dead. 5 experts. 5 expensive estimates. 5 reminders that some people were simply too poor to deserve hope. And yet, somehow, a forgotten little garage run by a single father was about to shock them all. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world. Stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, humanity can still shine through the cracks. The morning air smelled like wet pavement and gasoline as Nolan wiped his hands on a faded blue rag. His garage sat between an abandoned feed store and a field of overgrown grass nobody cared enough to cut anymore. The sign above the building had once read Pierce Auto Repair, but years of storms had peeled away half the letters. Most people in town drove past without noticing it existed. Some thought it had already closed. Nolan never imagined his life would end up here. 10 years earlier, he had worked at one of the largest dealerships in the county. He had steady pay, clean uniforms, health insurance, and dreams big enough to keep his young wife smiling. But life had a cruel way of rewriting plans. After his wife Mara died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, everything collapsed at once. Medical bills swallowed their savings. Depression consumed him quietly. The dealership replaced him within a month, and before long he found himself raising his 7-year-old daughter Ivy alone while trying to keep a dying garage alive. Most nights, Nolan stayed awake long after Ivy had fallen asleep on the couch in the office. He would stare at unpaid bills scattered across the desk and wonder how much longer he could keep pretending things were okay. Some weeks he barely earned enough to buy groceries. Other weeks he survived only because old customers handed him cash out of pity. Still, every morning he unlocked the garage door before sunrise. Not because business was good, but because quitting felt too much like letting Mara disappear completely. That same rainy morning, the caller finally arrived around 9 o'clock. A silver SUV rolled shakily into the parking lot, coughing smoke from the exhaust pipe like an exhausted animal. The driver stepped out slowly, shoulders heavy beneath a soaked brown jacket. His name was Elias Bennett, a middle school history teacher from 2 towns over. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The desperation in his eyes was impossible to miss. Elias explained that the SUV was all he had left after his divorce. It carried his 2 sons to school every day and got him to work across the county. Over the last month, the vehicle had begun jerking violently whenever it shifted gears. Then came the warning lights. Then the grinding noises. Then complete failure. He had visited 5 dealerships already. Each one told him the same thing. Transmission failure. Replacement required. $8,000 minimum. The final dealership had practically laughed when he admitted he couldn't afford it. One mechanic even suggested he sell the SUV for scrap. Elias had almost given up until an elderly gas station clerk mentioned Nolan's garage. "That old guy fixes things nobody else can," the clerk had said. Nolan looked at the SUV quietly while rain dripped from the hood. He had seen that expression before. The hopelessness. The embarrassment. The silent fear of not knowing how you would survive another month. He knew it too well. He asked Elias to leave the vehicle for the day. Truthfully, Nolan wasn't even sure he could help. But something about the man's exhausted face reminded him of himself after Mara died. A person hanging by a thread. A person one bad day away from completely falling apart. As the garage door rattled shut behind the SUV, Ivy sat cross-legged near the office heater doing homework with crayons spread across the floor. She looked up and smiled at her father the way children do when they still believe adults can fix everything. Nolan wished he still believed that too. Hours passed while he inspected the transmission. The dealerships had already labeled it beyond repair, but Nolan noticed something strange almost immediately. The transmission fluid wasn't burnt badly enough for catastrophic failure. The gear housing looked intact. There were no metal fragments in the pan. Something didn't add up. He crawled beneath the vehicle again, flashlight trembling in his hand, and noticed a damaged wiring harness hidden near the rear mount. Moisture had seeped inside the connector, causing false sensor readings that mimicked transmission failure. The issue wasn't the transmission itself. It was a $20 electrical fault. Nolan sat back on the cold concrete floor in disbelief. 5 dealerships had missed it. Or worse, they hadn't cared enough to look. For a long moment he simply stared upward at the leaking garage roof while anger rose in his chest. He thought about all the families drowning in debt because repair shops saw people as opportunities instead of human beings. By evening, Nolan repaired the wiring, reset the transmission module, and took the SUV for a drive beneath golden sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. The vehicle shifted perfectly. Smooth. Silent. Alive again. When Elias returned after work, he looked prepared for another heartbreak. Nolan handed him the keys without speaking much. Elias climbed into the SUV nervously and drove down the road. 10 minutes later he came back with tears in his eyes. The SUV drove like new. He asked how much he owed. Nolan hesitated before answering. $87. Elias stared at him in stunned silence. Then came the shaking hands. The tears he tried to hide. The kind of tears grown men release only after carrying too much pain for too long. He admitted he had less than $200 left in his account. He had spent weeks believing his life was about to collapse because of a repair he could never afford. Nolan simply nodded. Because he understood. Word spread faster than either of them expected. Elias posted online that night about the tiny garage that saved him from financial ruin after 5 dealerships failed him. At first the story reached only a few local families. Then hundreds. Then thousands. People began driving from neighboring towns just to meet the mechanic everyone was suddenly talking about. By the following week, Nolan's garage parking lot was full every morning. Single mothers arrived with broken vans. Elderly couples brought cars dealerships wanted to replace entirely. Delivery drivers came hoping someone honest still existed in the world. And Nolan treated every customer the same way. Like their struggles mattered. For the first time in years, the garage no longer felt empty. The old building echoed with laughter again. Ivy-colored pictures behind the counter while customers brought homemade cookies and coffee for the quiet mechanic who restored more than just vehicles. Nolan worked 12-hour days beneath the warm daylight pouring through dusty windows, but somehow he looked lighter than he had in years. Hope had returned slowly. Not loudly. But enough. Then came the unexpected visitor. One bright afternoon, a black luxury sedan pulled into the lot. Out stepped Victor Hale, regional owner of one of the dealerships that had diagnosed Elias's SUV. Expensive watch. Perfect suit. Cold expression. He didn't come to apologize. He came to threaten. Victor accused Nolan of damaging dealership reputations with false stories. He claimed complex repairs sometimes required replacement regardless of smaller issues. But beneath his polished words lurked something uglier. Fear. Because people were starting to question the honesty of expensive repair chains. Nolan listened quietly while tightening bolts beneath an old minivan. Grease stained his arms. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He looked nothing like the wealthy businessman standing nearby. Yet somehow Victor looked smaller. The confrontation drew attention from customers waiting outside. Some began recording on their phones. Victor eventually left, furious and embarrassed, tires spitting gravel across the road as he drove away. The video spread online within hours. Suddenly the little garage became a symbol. Not just of honesty, but of dignity. People connected deeply with Nolan's story because it reflected something painfully familiar. Too many had experienced being ignored, manipulated, or treated like numbers instead of human beings. Nolan reminded them that integrity still existed in ordinary places. Weeks later, local reporters arrived asking for interviews. Nolan hated cameras, but he agreed only because Ivy begged him to. During one interview, a reporter asked why he charged so little compared to larger dealerships. Nolan paused for several seconds before answering. Then he said something nobody forgot. Most people who walk into a garage aren't just carrying car problems. They're carrying life problems. Sometimes they need honesty more than they need repairs. The clip went viral. Across the country, comments flooded in from people sharing stories of mechanics, doctors, landlords, and businesses who had taken advantage of them during vulnerable moments. But mixed among the anger were thousands of messages thanking Nolan for reminding them kindness still existed. One afternoon, while sunlight streamed warmly across the garage floor, Ivy taped a handwritten sign near the register. "Thank you for helping people, Daddy." Nolan stared at those words for a long time. Because deep down, he realized something painful. He had spent years believing he failed his family after Mara died. He thought losing his job and struggling financially made him weak. But somehow, through all the hardship, he had become exactly the kind of man Mara once believed he was. A good one. Months passed, and the garage slowly transformed. Volunteers helped repair the leaking roof. Local businesses donated equipment. A retired mechanic even offered free labor twice a week because he admired Nolan's honesty. But the moment that truly broke Nolan emotionally came one warm spring afternoon. Elias returned. Not with another broken car, but with his 2 young sons carrying a toolbox wrapped in blue ribbon paper. Inside was a custom engraved wrench set with words etched into the metal. "For the man who gave our dad hope again." Nolan couldn't speak. His hands trembled while Ivy hugged his arm tightly beside him. Some gifts are too heavy for words. And some acts of kindness echo farther than we ever imagine. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories like this to people who may need hope today. And before we finish, special request, comment where you are watching from and tell us about someone in your life who showed kindness when you needed it most. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Nolan stood outside the garage beneath a sky painted orange by the setting sun. Ivy sat beside him eating fries from a paper bag while birds drifted lazily across the horizon. The garage sign still hung crooked. The walls were still cracked. The building was still old. But for the first time in many years, it no longer looked broken. It looked alive. Nolan realized then that miracles rarely arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes they appear quietly inside small garages beside forgotten roads. Sometimes they wear grease-stained gloves and carry years of grief behind tired eyes. And sometimes, when the world insists something is beyond saving, one honest person is enough to prove everyone else wrong.